in the end, writing is writing. Whatever you're writing about, whatever genre, whether it's journalism, novels, TV, kids' books, blogs, text message to someone, the skills are the same. It's communicating thoughts and ideas to someone through words. It's telling stories through the written word. To actually sit down and write the words, "The name's Bond, James Bond," was very exciting in a sort of childish way. So it was a perfect thing for me. And all I did when I wrote that first book is I thought, as a 14-year-old, what book would I really have enjoyed reading? Having done action adventure stories for kids, I wanted to do another genre. I've always really liked horror. My eldest boy was really into horror, and I figured if you could really scare a kid with a book, if you could scar them for life, they would always remember where they were when they read that book and the effect that it had on them. And that's what you want as a writer, to stick in people's minds. As a children's writer, you're always asked, what was your favourite book when you were a child? And I've got no idea. By now, having been a children's writer for many years, you thought I would have come up with a good answer. The thing was, I read a huge amount. And mostly library books, whether it was from the local library or the school library. We didn't have many books in the house. I certainly didn't go out and buy books. So the books came and went. I loved reading books of mythology, Greek myths, Roman myths, Norse mythology, knights, King Arthur, Robin Hood, anything like that. There was a lot of historical fiction around actually in the 60s when I was a kid, and I read a lot of that, particularly medieval stuff. Really, if the hero had a sword, I was happy. But one of the books I really do remember very well is the Incredible Adventures of Professor Brainstorm by Norman Hunter, which is a really funny book, and it had illustrations by Heath Robinson, and that's probably what got me into comedy and character comedy. So much that I was lucky enough to make a couple of Professor Brainstorm films for the BBC. The other thing that I think is really useful is to think of an ending for what you're writing. So many kids have an idea, oh, I've got a great idea for the first page, and then it's like, oh, I don't know what to write now. What you want to do is have a really good idea for your last page and think, oh, I've got to get there. So you set off on this adventure and you've got a destination in mind, so you can take any amount of detours and have as many other adventures as you like along the way, as long as you've got somewhere to get to. I've been writing since I was about 8 years old, and you would sort of think that you knew how to do it by now and that you just sit down and it comes out. But the interesting thing is that every new project you take on brings with it a whole new set of challenges. It does help to look at how other people solve similar problems. It's always, if you're a novelist, it's good to read other novels, and if you're a scriptwriter, it's really interesting to read other people's scripts and also talk to other people of how they solve the problems they're faced with. I've written crime stuff before, but it's tended to be from the point of view of the criminal. I've never written from the point of view of the person solving the crime, and it's very interesting because you tell a detective story in the complete opposite way that you would tell a normal story. A detective story is all about what you're trying to keep hidden and the things that you can't show to the reader or to the viewer, and yet which are really important to the story. So you're sort of doing the sort of opposite of what you normally do in a story. You say, well, you've got to show this because that explains that, and then they do this. But in a detective story, you're constantly hiding all that stuff, and the motivations and the character of the criminal. If it's got to be a whodunit, you can't make them obviously a murderer on the first page. So that's an example of suddenly I'm faced with something and thinking, oh, I can't write this in the way that I would normally write a story like this. My advice to any young aspiring writer would be, don't do it. I really don't need the competition. It's hard enough selling books without a lot of new young writers coming along and writing better books than me. No, I mean, the only advice you can give, it's pretty boring advice, is if you want to be a writer, you've got to write. You've got to write a lot, and you've got to read a lot.